Nurturing Child and Parent Development. And it's being presented by Dr. Pradeep Gidwani. And on the next slide, I want to tell you who he is. If you're the one person on this webinar that does not know, I'll tell you, I personally met him for the first time when I was a First Five care coordinator. Woohoo! Go care coordination, First Five. And our team heard incredible information and cutting edge, developmental strategies from Dr. Gidwani and his team. So he is, do I even have to tell you, pediatrician, community health leader, First Five advocate, child development leader, and all the wonderful things. He asked me to keep it brief, or else this would be a 2-hour webinar on that. So with that, I am going to pass it along. I'm going to say welcome to you, Dr. Gidwani, and we're so excited to have you.
Great. Thank you, Jess. And also, Jess, if something comes up in the chat that someone wants to talk about, please feel free to jump in. Okay. Thank you. So good morning, everybody. I'm so excited to be with you all. I am very deeply into child development. It's been a career-long interest of mine. And just to let you know, my inspiration was a pediatrician named T. Barry Brazelton, who passed away just before his 100th birthday, just about a year ago. And he's an amazing man. And his advice for frazzled parents was, I'd like them to learn they can understand their baby by watching the baby's behavior. And that's one thing we'll be talking about today. Behavior is language. It tells us what's going on with kids. And in many ways, this is great. It allows me to get back to my roots to really talk about development. I do a lot in social emotional development, which we'll talk about. And today, I'm really just giving you an intro and pointing you to really good resources. I literally have crammed way too much information in here. I've broken many of my own rules for presenting, but I'm just so excited to provide this information. And one of the things that Dr. Brazelton always talked about was touch points. And he talks about these periods in a child's life when they're starting something new after old predictable behaviors have stopped. So as a parent, for those of you who are parents, you know that, hey, my kid's got this, and then boom, all of a sudden they start to walk or they stop sleeping through the night. And there's a change, but these changes are relatively predictable. And his work on touch points was beautiful. But I love this picture of him to listen to a child. And I think that's one of the big themes you'll hear is we want to watch, listen, and observe children because they tell us so much through not only their words, but their behaviors, everything. It really, truly is amazing. So the paradigm for everything for me is nurture. And nurture is to care for and to encourage the growth or development of anything, whether it's plants, pets, for me, it's kids. And it occurs when parents and caregivers are available and they're able to be sensitive in responding to their child and meeting their child's needs. So available, attuned, interested parents and caregivers are critical to our little ones' worlds. And I think of nurturing relationships as love in action. And I think that's just an important thing to think about is as we care for little ones, it really is this opportunity to nurture, and parents need nurture as well. And the beautiful part about nurture is it builds better brains. It creates something that's called healthy attachment, which we'll talk about later, social emotional intelligence, the ability to self-regulate, and resilience. The word resilience is really interesting. It gets thrown around a lot, and it gets thrown around like it's something you have or you don't have. And the beauty of resilience is it really is built in the context of relationships. There's someone who helps you or helps you co-regulate and allows you to build resilience. So resilience is something that we can really, really help ourselves and others develop. And again, it's always done in the context of relationships. And finally, this is just one of those slides. It's just too darn cute. Nurturing relationships are inborn. We really have an innate nature to nurture. And so when someone is not in a nurturing frame, we know something has happened that has disrupted that. And I'm just going to leave you with the first thought to take away is every parent wants the best for their child as they understand what is best for their child. And they're teaching their child with things that are unconscious to them. So it's what we call implicit. And it really is, they really do want the best. I've talked to schizophrenic mothers who, from their frame of reference, what they want for their child makes sense to them. And, in that situation, I really worked with helping them understand what their child needed. And that actually helped that mother take her medication so that she could be available for her child. So we have some amazing stories when we reach parents in the right way, when they can really understand. So before we get further, this very, very busy slide is showing us that we're going to be talking about the blue part, the developmental part. But development happens in the context of ecology or environment. So the environment is both the social environment and the physical environment, and it has an effect on biology. And all of these things actually work with one another. So it's really important to understand how these all work together. And in pediatrics, we always help people understand that what happens early in life has profound effects. At some point in the future, I'm sure we'll be having a webinar for you around the adverse childhood experiences. And I know the next one coming up is hope, which is kind of an antidote to that, which is fantastic. So again, just keep in mind as we're talking, there's some important things that kids live in an environment, that their development and their biology, everything is interrelated. And also children lives in the context of relationships. And this is from a sociologist who was actually involved with getting Head Start started. His name is Yuri Boffenbrenner. And he really was the person that helped us understand that the child really is in the context of family, community, and society, and really did a great job of illuminating how we need to align these things to really have an agenda that really helps kids and families in their day-to-day. Also, this is one that's always been interesting. When we started our work with First Five about 20 years ago, there was this real focus on, well, we need to do things for the kids. We need to do things for the kids. Well, if a child is 0 to 5, we need to do things for the kids and their parents. And I think that's the important part. If we focus on the adults who care for kids, then we can really achieve breakthrough outcomes. And this diagram comes from an organization called the Center for the Developing Child, and they're at Harvard. And the pediatrician who started, his name is Jack Shonkoff. And Jack Shonkoff is really important in helping us really look at the early brain work and how the brain is so impacted in the first 3 and 5 years of life. 80% to 90% of the child's brain at 3 and at 5 is developed. So these early years are so critical. And he's been really a great champion of bringing people together and talking about the early brain work. Oops, went the wrong way. And if you looked on the slide that Jess shared with us about the strengthening families protective factors, there's going to be a whole conversation coming up introducing you to that. I believe that is on November 30th. And we're going to just really quickly, I'm going to share with you, this is a group, the Center for the Study of Social Policy, and they look at what really works. And what they looked at that really makes an impact for kids is parents' resiliency, social connections, knowledge of parenting and child development, concrete supports in times of need, and social emotional competency of children, and I would say, and parents. And so today we're going to be talking about the purple box. And this is, again, kind of breaking the rules of slides. I've got too much information here, but luckily you have that in front of you, so you can read it if you wanted to look at the notes section. But what's really important here is understanding that parents' behavior can lead to a secure attachment. And as I mentioned, we will talk about that in the course of our day today, our morning. And the importance of being attuned and emotionally available to one's child, being nurturing, responsive, and reliable, having regular, predictable, and consistent routines. I need to star that one because I think that one's so important. Interactive language experiences, providing physical and emotional safe environments for one's child, and providing opportunities for one's child to explore and learn by doing. C is really important, appropriate developmental expectations. And this is where you all come in. You can really help parents learn what are important in terms of what they expect, those touch points when changes are coming, which can cause stress for parents because parents get to a level of feeling comfortable and competent, and then their child's behavior changes as they learn and they grow. And it's a challenge for all of us. But the reason I'm spending a little extra time on this is it's really important to understand that one of the #1 predictors for child abuse is inappropriate developmental expectations. So as we talk today, and as I help you with tools that you can share with parents and ways to talk with parents, you become so important in helping them understand that their child is not trying to make them mad. Their child is not trying to do that intentionally. These things are developmental and they happen in a predictable series of ways. D, positive disciplining techniques. So again, I'm going to spend a little time here. Discipline actually comes from the word disciple, and disciple means student. So if you think about it, discipline should be in a way of teaching. Unfortunately, for so many parents, their experience with discipline is punishment. And it becomes really important for us to help parents understand that discipline is really about teaching your child and helping them build skills. And we need to be understanding that parents need help with building skills. Nobody knows how to parent automatically. It is something we learn. And then finally, recognizing and attending to the special needs of a child. And that's not just kids with higher needs. It's just every child has their unique way of going through the world, and we need to honor that. So again, this is a somewhat busy slide, but what I really want you to understand is if you look at the bottom, you see the ages. So you see, like with vision, how early that happens, right from birth. But I really want you to see the next two: emotional control and habitual ways of responding. Those dark blue areas are what are called critical periods, and those critical periods wane. That means you're still learning. However, I don't want you to be misled into thinking that you can't develop emotional regulation and change the way that you respond later. It just takes a lot more work. But then if you look at peer skills, so, around 3, they start playing with others. But again, language happens before the year of 1. And really the cognitive thinking piece comes in at 4. And we're going to talk about the relationship between social emotional development and cognition or thinking. But again, I want to really focus on those 2 areas: emotional control and habitual ways of responding. These happen so early in life. This is starting to happen before the first year of life. I've shared this slide, I think, for the last 10 years. And each time I share it, I'm always struck by how profound that early first year of life is. So this is what we're here for today: child development. It's a process that every child goes through. It involves learning and mastering skills like sitting, walking, talking, skipping, trying on shoes. And kids learn these skills, and they're called developmental milestones, and they happen during predictable time periods. And that's what we're going to be really looking at, those predictable time periods. And classically, the domains of development are speech and language, gross motor skills, which is your big muscles, fine motor skills, your smaller muscles, like your hands and your fingers particularly, and you can understand how that's so important in writing and other things like that. Cognitive ability, which is the ability to learn and solve problems. And as I mentioned, I spend a huge amount of my time in the social emotional development of children. And the reason is as we've learned more and more, we have come to understand how profoundly important the social emotional development of children is. And it's their ability to interact with others, including helping themselves, self-control. And so one of the things that we do know is self-regulation is probably the most predictive skill in terms of future success. And we will talk about that later in the talk. So here are some terms that I think are really important to just know. So developmental surveillance, it's a system to regularly, routinely check the child's development. And this involves everyone who interacts with the child. So this is where parents are so critical. Screening is really using a standardized way of identifying children who require help or closer observation and connecting parents to resources. Evaluation or assessment is when the child requires help, and it's a process of dividing the needs and crafting a plan for families. And ideally, that plan is shared with everybody who's involved with the child. And as Jess mentioned, I am the medical director of an incredible project down here in San Diego where we treat kids with mild to moderate developmental and behavioral concerns. And what's amazing here is we're really kind of going, as they say, upstream to really help kids and families. Now, when you do this, of course, you're working very closely with the family. This, as Jess mentioned, she was a care coordinator, and our care coordinators really are amazing in terms of helping families through these systems. And we're going to talk about some of the systems available throughout the state. And again, this is something that's so important. And this is where you can play such an important role, is helping families move through these incredibly complex systems. All families experience stress. All families deserve support and help. And what you all do is so critically important. So as I mentioned, these developmental milestones, they happen in time frames. They happen in a sequential fashion. They build on the one that was last developed. They're in windows that we can predict. And so what we have is some resources for that, which come from the American Academy of Pediatrics, my professional organization. And it's just called healthychildren.org. And I picked these because this one has the general information around kids' ages and stages, but the second one is really nice. I set it for the baby section, but you can move to toddler and each age. And it has these just incredibly beautiful pictures, incredible amounts of information. And it's nice because this one's a little bit more inclusive with the physical health and other health type items, as well as the developmental piece. I also have for you a developmental milestone tracker that was developed by the Center for Disease Control. Now, why did the Center for Disease Control get involved with children's behavior? Well, they wanted to prevent child abuse. They want all kids to have safe, stable, and nurturing environments. And at first, when I heard they were doing this, I'm like, why are you guys doing that? That's our work at the American Academy of Pediatrics. But I have to say, they've done an incredible job. And one of the things that they did, which I am so excited about, is a tracker for developmental milestones. In the old days, we're going to go through some specific areas of development. I'm going to talk to you about the milestones. But when I started teaching this 15 years ago, what we would do is we would go through and we would teach kids child development. We teach about all the milestones, and you had to remember the milestones. And so it became a very specific way of doing things. And it really, it was not nearly as effective as this. We are putting the power of cell phones into use with parents being able to look at these milestones. So it provides photos and videos, it illustrates them, you can track them. If families don't have access to phones, they also have these beautiful printouts of the different milestones and checklists. And it's really just a great way to help families. So again, I had to put on the little, it's on Android Play and the App Store, so they knew what they were doing. So you can go to that website. The other part is that website has incredible links. If you go to the column that says for families, there's just, again, a beautiful set of visuals. Some are videos, some are just pictures, but they are so helpful and really just great work. So let's go into one of the milestones. We're going to talk a little bit about language. We're not going to go through all the milestones because, again, that's the old way of doing things. And you can download this app and you can play around with it. And it is really, the app is great. And the two websites that I've given you, healthychildren.org and the CDC websites, are just fantastic. So language delay, it happens in 1 out of 10 kids, and many of these problems will persist through school and adulthood if we don't work on it. Not surprisingly, if you cannot communicate what you need or you can't understand what's going on, it will lead to behavioral problems. And classes and enrichment work best for most. I mean, so again, what we're talking about is if we can teach parents, if we can teach the adults who care for children ways to help them, kids can make incredible gains. And we want to detect this early, by 2 to 3 years, because this is that time of incredible word growth. For those of you who have children, I always joke about there's this period of time where your kid's saying about 10 words, and then the next day they're saying 20, and the next day they're saying 40, and you're just like, what happened overnight? And then all of a sudden they're talking. And I can always, I joke with parents that you really can't wait for your kid to talk, but when they start talking so much, and you're like, you can't wait for them to be quiet. So it's always that funny balance, but it is incredible to watch them learn. And there are 2 types of language that we're really concerned about. One is called receptive delays. It's the ability to hear and process. It's hearing is what we always check, but it's also, if you think about it, it's just such a complex piece of listening to language and processing it. The other set of delays we have are expressive or communication. And so we also have slow talkers, we have slow learners, and these are just important things to look at. So what are we looking for? So the milestones we look for between 6 months and a year is responding to their own name, using a wide range of sounds. They make sounds like baba, mama, dada. They can shake their head no, and they can understand simple words or commands. Very simple. At 1 year to 6 months, they can use some simple words. They can ask for food and drink with words. They can point to a desired object. They can point to a correct picture when they say, show me the doggy. Now, of course, I love baby sign. I love watching kids learn to communicate using signs. My niece did that, and it was great because, they use the symbol for more, which is simply just doing this with your hands. And she would do this. And the funniest thing was, at 14 months, I was playing with her and she laughed and she did the more sign. So it was for more than just food and what they want. Sometimes they'll communicate that they want more laughter. So that was always one of kind of those memories. She's 17 now, but I still remember that story. And then between 18 months to 2 years, they'll talk in 2 to 3 word sentences. They're clear about 50% of the time for other adults other than their parents. Parents understand their child's language in incredible ways. Oh, I'm sorry, I jumped to 2, sorry. 18 months to 2 years, they follow simple directions. They use about 10 words. They follow 2-part directions. They can use 2-word sentences, and they enjoy singing and songs. Sorry, I jumped ahead. At 2 to 3 is when they start talking in 2 to 3 word sentences, and you can understand them half the time. They'll understand prepositions like in, on, under, besides, and they can use pronouns like I, he, she, and you. So it's just very cute watching kids develop language. Now, why it's so interesting to me, the word piece is so important. This was a small study, and it was only with 48 families. But what they noticed was in families of different socioeconomic backgrounds, by the time the kids got to 3 years, the amount of words that they used were very, very different. So kids who were from professional families had nearly twice the amount of words as kids who were in lower socioeconomic families, and working class families were right in the middle. Now, what's interesting about this is there is nothing innately, does not have to do with the biology or the genetics. This has to do with what we call exposure. So it's how much words and what does a word-rich environment look like? And so at like the Harlem project for, there's a children's project there where they taught low-income parents that this is important. And you know what, like I said earlier, all parents want the best for their kids. And so they really started using words. And so this is just an important thing for us to share with everyone that, you know, in the development of language, it happens really, really early. And you might have seen campaigns from First 5 about talk, read, and sing. So it doesn't matter how the words are used. It really is a question of using the words and the joint interaction. So this is, again, something that you can share with families that's just very practical, is this, you know, talk to your kids when you're doing simple things. Put it into your day-to-day work, you know, just talk all the time. Oh, we're doing this, we're doing that, you know. I'm putting the laundry in, you know, what would you like to eat? Oh, you look happy. So again, just that word-rich environment is stimulating the brain. I would actually call it talk, see, if I could do it over again, I'd call it talk, read, sing, and listen. Because again, you want to really follow your child's cues and have as interactive as possible. And one of the things that's really interesting is you've heard parents talk in what's called parentese, right? It's a little bit where you're using real words. You're not doing baby talk, but you're using real words. You're elongating the vowels. You're exaggerating the tone of your voice. You're speaking directly to the child. It's happy. It's engaging. But it really helps infants socially tune into their parents and respond, even if it's just babbling. And parent surveys estimate that by 18 months, there's, again, a giant word gap that is evolving. So this thing of parentese, which it's fascinating because we hear it in almost every society. So it's just incredible to think about. So again, this is another thing that you can share with families that, you know, that makes a difference in a child's life, lifelong. So again, let's come back to why we screen. We want to screen because it catches problems earlier. It allows us for early treatment. It's effective. It's efficient. Critical periods of rapid growth in the brain and body make it so important to screen. And most kids who would benefit from early intervention aren't identified until they're in school. And again, as we showed with the brain, the development, it's so much easier to catch it early. And developmental delays, learning disorders, behavioral and social emotional problems affect 1 out of 6 kids. It's pretty profound. And only 20 to 30% of those kids are identified before school begins. We're getting better at it, but we're still not where we want to be. And why does it matter so much? Well, early treatment has been shown to help with graduation from high school, holding a job, living independently. It decreases teen pregnancy. It decreases delinquency and violent crime. And it's estimated that we save 30 to 100,000 per child by screening early. Again, I mentioned that the American Academy of Pediatrics is my professional organization, and we recommend developmental behavioral screening for all kids at the doctor's visits at 9 months, 18 months, and 30 months. Again, that's standard routine screening. If a parent says that they're concerned, we screen right away. In addition, we also recommend that screening for autism spectrum disorders is also at the 18-month and 24-month visit. And again, this is just a visual of that with who you would refer to, and we'll talk about those groups as it relates to assessment and treatment. But there's the screeners are that second column. So one of the screeners that we use is the Ages and Stages Questionnaire, and it's composed of 19 questionnaires, and it's designed to be completed by parents or a primary caregiver. And it has questionnaire intervals, as you can see, by month. And the questionnaires contain 30 developmental items, and they're sequenced. And they have communication, gross motor, fine motor, problem solving or cognitive, and personal social. There's also a different ASQ for social emotional development, and we're on our second version of that, and we're on our third version of the ASQ, the Ages and Stages. But we'll talk about social emotional and why it's a little bit more complex and more pieces to it. But just some basics about the ASQ3, the one for general development. The reading level is 4th to 6th grade. Illustrations are provided when possible. Parents say yes, sometimes or not yet. And program staff can convert that to a point value, add the totals, and compare them to established cutoffs. So this is, again, now into that screening process, a little bit more formal. The part that's amazing is through support through Comcast, NBC Universal, Easter Seals is providing free access to this tool online. So I put that on there. There's the first link is a link to the general Easter Seals kind of overview, but then the second one actually has the Ages and Stages Questionnaire. So as I mentioned, on social emotional, the ASQ2 is designed to exclusively screen for social emotional behaviors. And so on the ASQ3, you saw that there's a personal social domain, and those are questions that really about can the child meet their own self-help needs in an age-appropriate manner, like dressing themselves, knowing their names, knowing other people's names. It's an important start, but behavior is a lot more complex than development, and so the ASQ really is broad and complex in its scope, and it really does include areas around self-regulation, compliance, social communication, adaptive function, autonomy, affect, or how and interaction with other people. So again, it's a little bit more complex, and it's only 9 questionnaires. That's the different ages. Again, 30 questions. This one's actually a little bit more complicated to score, and so it takes a little bit more training. But again, it's the similar. There's the reading level is just like it was in the ASQ3. It's from the 4th to 6th grade level with illustrations where possible. So what happens when you do a screener is you need to really tailor your communication to families and meet them where they're at. I think you all do this on a regular basis. One of the things that's really critical in this area is the readiness to hear and act on the information. One of our more senior developmental leaders in the San Diego area, Kristen Gist, always makes this point is you really have to be there for families, and you have to stay there for families based on their readiness. You also have to see how they feel emotionally. You have to tailor to educational level, cultural beliefs, what resources the family have. Of course, if families are under a lot of stress, development really does often fall to the bottom of their needs. So again, we just really want to meet families where they are and support families. And the Strengthening Families framework, concrete supports in times of needs are really important. And this piece about the ability to utilize the system, I will be the first one to say that the system can be better in terms of how we support families. And that's, again, in the work that you all do, supporting families, getting to the services and accessing those services and getting through the services requires an incredible degree of support. And so, again, we're not talking about it today, but many of our families have experienced trauma, and that will reduce your ability to get through these systems. And so again, we need to support families however and wherever we can. And I know I'll keep talking about that because we've seen that's made a huge difference in our work. So what is early intervention? It's a term to describe services and supports that help babies and toddlers, usually from birth to 3, with developmental delays or disabilities in their families. It includes speech and it may include speech, therapy, physical therapy, occupational therapy, depending on the needs of the child. The part that's so important is it can have such a significant impact on a child's ability to learn new skills and increase their success, not just for school, but lifetime. And through federal law and state partnerships, programs are available in every state and every county. And these services are provided for free or at reduced cost for kids who meet the state's criteria for developmental delay. So when they go to the doctor's office, it's really important to help parents have the words. So this is the stuff that really is critical. It's really actually worth role playing with parents. When you call your doctor's office, say, I would like to make an appointment to see the doctor because I'm concerned about my child's development. And you want to share those specific concerns. And as I mentioned, either use the developmental tracker or the developmental milestone sheets that the CDC has, or from healthykids.org, and really have parents write things down and prepare their questions ahead of time. I do that when I go to the doctor. My wife makes sure that I do that. She says, make sure your 3 questions are written down. So I make a list before I go to the doctors, because when I go there, I always forget. And then later on, I'm like, shoot, I should have asked. So we really want to empower parents to be able to ask the doctor and to advocate at the doctor's office. In California, many of the first fives have supported something called Help Me Grow. So you're going to need to look and see if it's in your community. And it's creating a network of local partners dedicated to developmental monitoring and early intervention. It educates and trains local medical providers and early educators on best practices around developmental screening and referral. And it provides tools and resources to support screening and referral. They're also collecting data and trying to advocate at a statewide level. So each county is different on the Help Me Grow, but if there's a Help Me Grow in your region, please make sure you know them, talk with them, see where they are and how they can help your families. It's just another layer of help for you. So let's dive into the government mandated programs. And so there's Early Start, which is also known as Regional Center. And as I have another thing, a Regional Center for older kids for certain diagnoses. The schools are also part of the services available. There's also California Children's Services for kids with higher medical needs, and then Exceptional Family Resources. Now, in California, these programs reach about 1.1% of the kids. So it's between 1 and 2%. And families, like I mentioned, need help navigating these systems. What's really important here is to know that 1 out of 6 kids may have a developmental concern. So we are not treating kids and families at the level that we would really like to. The program that we're running in San Diego through First Five funding, we would love it to be statewide. We'd love it to be nationwide. So many kids, it's just a question of exposure. And when you teach parents what they can do to help their kids, what we see is everyone's off and running. The parents are happier, the kids are happier, everybody benefits. So Early Start and Regional Center is for kids up to 2 years and 11 months. Parents can refer kids with disabilities and some risk factors, access to all areas. They'll provide speech, developmental, physical therapy, occupational therapy, and some mental health. And this is through the Individuals with Disabilities Act Part C. And I shared a link that really helps you identify what's in your county. So again, when you call, this is that other piece. This is going to, I'm sorry if it feels repetitive, but this is so critical. When you call the office, which is located in the county, you need to let them know, I'm concerned about my child's development. I'd like to request an evaluation. Could you help me or let me speak to someone who can? Again, be ready to share your specific concerns. You'll also be asked for some general information about yourself. And you want to write down who you spoke with, the date and what you said and you might need this information later. So again, I just want you to be in that position to empower parents. And it really is that concrete piece. Likewise, with school districts, it's similar. They take all ages. They treat deaf and blind kids who are under 3. They have that mandate. Otherwise, they treat kids 3 to 5 with parent referral. So the parents have to refer. So if I refer as a pediatrician, they won't take that. They need the parent to refer. That's why we really need the parents to have the language. They have to have more than one area of disability. And the degree of their disability is relatively severe. And they'll only assess in the suspected area of disability. So this is why giving parents the language is so important. And treatment varies from school district to school district. Again, this is the Individuals with Disability Act Part B in terms of federal regulations. And I guess this is an important piece to just share with you. This is under special education, right? And what we need to keep in mind is our school systems are underfunded, particularly in special ed, and they've been asked to do this work without adequate resources. In my experience, the folks that I've met who do this work are incredibly compassionate, kind, wonderful human beings who are working in a very difficult system. So I always try to be patient because I always want the best for the kids and the families. But again, similarly, you can see when you call that local elementary school or the Board of Education, if your child is older than 3, you need to say, I'm concerned about my child's development. I'd like to talk to somebody about having my child evaluated. Can you help me, or can you let me, or let me speak to someone who can? Again, same thing. The specific concerns, and write down that information because you might have to refer to it later. Now, children's services, again, it's specific diagnoses like cerebral palsy, muscular dystrophy, epilepsy, Down syndrome. This was created so families wouldn't go bankrupt if their child had high needs. And it provides diagnostic, treatment services, medical case management, physical and occupational therapy to kids under 21. And it requires a physician's referral. And there's a sliding scale for payments. And again, I've included that link. Now, family resource centers, they also provide peer-to-peer support for children and families, and they may offer activities, classes, and community resources and transition assistance for families. And again, it's at the same website for a regional center. They work very closely with regional center. And again, I've included the website and the phone number. So while you wait, unfortunately, families have to wait weeks, sometimes months before they're able to get an appointment to see a specialist or start early intervention services. And it can be really frustrating for parents. And if you find yourself in that situation, there's some things you can do. So on this next slide, again, support parents in their caretaking role. Show examples how to create those secure attachments and healthy emotional environments. Foster play as an opportunity to learn and think and solve problems. We jokingly say play is the work of kids, but it's not just, it's so important because it's a real opportunity to learn things like self-regulation, to learn all kinds of things. Also, again, screening for those areas of concern, and then using the screening as an educational tool to show parents how important they are in their kids' development. So that Ages and Stages Questionnaire, one of the reasons I like it so much is after you get the results, it actually talks about activities you can do to help your kids. And that's the important part to remember in child development. The activity, the exposure, the interacting with kids make a big difference. So for example, when we started our work in child development, we found that a lot of kids were having problems using scissors. Well, parents didn't want to give their kids scissors. So we ordered a whole bunch of safety scissors and we showed parents, oh, look, you can use these safety scissors. It won't hurt your child. They can't cut their hair, which a lot of little kids love to cut their own hair. But you can't do anything but cut paper with them. And so it was great. We had a solution where there was a lack of exposure and we were able to add it. Okay, so this is a time that I'd say, all right, we've been talking for a while. I've given you so much information. Just stop for a second. If you need to stretch, if you need to move around a little bit, please feel free to, because we're going to jump into the next section, which is social emotional development, and really one of my favorite places. Hi, Dana.
Hi, Dr. Pradeep. We have a couple of questions from this first section. Do you want to take them now or hold till the end?
Let's take them now because it's just.
Okay. So our first question is from Maribel Perez, and she is asking about baby sign language and asking if a 14-month-old is not verbally saying more but is using sign language, should there be a concern?
Wow, that's a great question. So that's one that I would love to personally see the kid. I'd love to screen the kid. I think the part that's really interesting is with baby sign, the child's needs are often being met. So what I tell parents in that situation is just to keep making sure you're using the words and you're encouraging the child to use words along with the baby sign. So at 14 months, I wouldn't be too terribly worried because the child is getting their needs met and they're communicating. I would encourage the parent at this point to use more words and to encourage the child to use words. So again, going back to those early milestones, the babbling and the sounds, that becomes really important. What's really nice about the example that you're giving is if they're using baby signs, there's a lot of interaction happening. So you don't have to worry about some of the other developmental concerns.
Okay, thank you for that. The next one is from Sharon, and she would like to know, when a referral is needed for EI, how would you encourage parents to advocate for their kiddos in getting that referral when the barrier may be the pediatrician themselves? And it sounds like you've spoken to this a little bit in terms of some of the systems, but if you want to elaborate a little bit.
Yeah, again, so much of this is so county specific. The joke is in California, if you know one county, you know one county. It becomes a little bit frustrating. So what I talk about with parents is, again, with regional center and with the schools, parents can go directly to those sources and self-refer. So if the pediatrician is quote unquote the barrier, just go forward, because you deserve to have that. You're going to be really strengthened by looking at those developmental milestones and helping the parents get comfortable with that. Also, again, if you can have them do the Ages and Stages Questionnaire online, it gives you more data, more information. And the biggest thing that you want to do is empower your families to advocate for themselves. So many of us have been taught how to do that, but it is not the experience for a vast majority of our parents. They often hear somebody in authority who says no, and they stop. And I have learned from my own wife that you never stop until you get what you need for your kids. We have a running joke that I'm like, wow, I mean, I got a master's in public health in addition to being a doctor, and she's an incredible advocate. And it's just, you have to push when the system isn't giving you what you need. So never let anyone be the barrier to what your child needs, whether it's the doctor, whether it's anybody. Parents know, and parents' gut intuition is always important.
So I think this leads into another really important question from Heather. Heather asks, I work with children in foster care, therefore there's a lot of trauma. When screening with ASQs, I find it difficult to tell if the low scores are related to trauma or are organic. Are there any tools that help tease this out? Interventions are likely the same irrespective of cause. However, do you know if the prognosis is different?
Wow, I can do a whole 90-minute seminar on that. So a couple of things. One of the things that we are very lucky here in San Diego County is our child welfare understands that inherently any child in the child welfare system has an attachment disruption. I'm getting ready to talk about attachment and social emotional development. And what we really find is rebuilding those attachment relationships becomes profoundly reparative, even in adults, right? So this is a critical element. So I would say that almost all teasing out the difference between behaviors, whether they're biological, organic, or trauma related in child welfare, is the area that we're working on right now. This is the area that I dive into a lot. It is not easy. It takes an incredibly high level of skill and sophistication to understand it. Your question actually shares a high level of understanding and sophistication. And I think you need to treat the child, and you need to be looking at both of those pieces as the route to helping you with helping the child manage their behavior. So fundamentally, it's about helping the child manage their behavior, and co-regulation becomes really important, and the parent skill becomes very important. So support isn't for just the child, it's for the child and the child-parent interaction or the relationship. So there's three pieces that you have to be cognizant of when you're treating. One of my favorite modalities in the early trauma work is child-parent psychotherapy, and Alicia Lieberman is a huge name there, and she's up at UCSF. Chandra Ghosh Ippen is one of her trainers. I've been trained in that modality, and I really do find it to be incredibly thoughtful and helpful and flexible in helping the kids in that situation. I'm trying to get more and more people trained in it. But again, you need to be able to look at all of those things. In terms of prognosis, I think the truth of the matter is what we know in what's called the infant and early childhood mental health world is so critical. And what we understand is going to help adult psychiatry and adolescent psychiatry. But most child and adolescent psychiatrists are trained to treat kids over 5. And we know that so much of this stuff is happening early, and we really have to work with the parent and the child.
Thank you. One more question before we move on
Sure.
to the next section. Camelia asks, would you expect potential delays in speaking if the child is in a bilingual household?
This is one of the favorite questions, dual language learners. So, it just depends so much on the exposure and what they have. And I think the degree of sophistication that you need to tease out language delay in 2 languages. Ideally, you want bilingual, bicultural speech and language pathologists. We're trying to develop more and more of those. They're hard to find, but they're still incredible. There may be some delays. And so again, you are really looking more in the language that's most spoken to help you with milestones. And again, I don't want to minimize the fact that dual language learners, there are some issues that come up, but I do know that in the long run, we know that dual language speakers actually do better in many ways, have more flexibility, cognitively, have different things. So again, wherever there might be some delay, it tends to be in the language as the secondary language, but you want to look at that primary language and really look for milestones in the primary language. Okay. Ready to roll?
We're ready to go.
Okay. So my favorite thing in the world, social emotional development, it includes children's experience, expression, and management of emotions, their ability to establish positive and rewarding relationship with others. And those abilities include identifying one's own feelings, to accurately read and comprehend the emotional states of others, to manage strong emotions and express them in a constructive manner, regulate one's own behavior, and to develop empathy for others and establish and maintain relationships. What I'm trying to say in this very, very busy slide is infants experience and perceive emotions before they fully understand them. In learning to recognize and label and manage emotions, and to perceive and attempt to understand the emotions of others, kids build skills, and they need families, peers, teachers, and others to help them. Even newborns attend to stimuli that resembles faces. They prefer their mom's voices. Adults support the early emotional regulation, and responsive caregiving begins to regulate the emotions and sense of predictability and safety. And brain research shows that emotion and cognition are profoundly interrelated. Actually, all of development is interrelated, but these 2 areas are so important. And most of our early learning happens in the context of emotional supports. It is just like amazing to me. And I've learned so much and continue to learn so much. And that's what I love about this is no matter what I know, there's so much more to learn. And I just want to give you some incredible resources. 0 to 3 has really kind of changed our country. Some great leaders got together and said, we need to focus on this. They have been around for a number of years. These are some of the most wonderful people I know. And I give you two links within their incredible website, which has so many resources. But the first one is the early development and the social emotional development. And then the second one has resources in developing skills. And that's just amazing. Another one that I love is the Center for Social Emotional Development for Early Learning. And these are really focused around our early care education setting. Great resources. I just popped you right onto the resource page. You can play around on that website, but I just wanted to go right into the resources for families section. So one of the important parts is when we're distressed, we all need someone to respond to us. And if you look at these pictures, you see there's a person with everyone except that little baby in the middle. But you know she has a good attachment relationship because she's reaching out to somebody to comfort her. And when it comes to emotional regulation, babies and young children orient to the parental reaction. Parents and babies and children regulate their internal emotions by asking for comforting. Parents can help their babies and their young kids learn to soothe themselves. And parents model how emotions are identified and coped with. So again, coming back to parents are so important in this process. So if we look at this, the range of emotions and the nature of the child's emotional reactions are impacted by the emotional regulation. The range of emotions permitted at the home are taught by parents, again, implicitly, not explicitly. The range of emotions that families tend towards, again, is taught to kids early. parenting style and temperament play into this. And when we start thinking about emotional regulation problems in infancy, we can see kids that are difficult to soothe, they're irritable, they have lower activity levels, they have developmental delays. And again, if you can think about this, is if you have a mother or a father who is stressed and an infant who's difficult to soothe, it's going to be very, very challenging. In 3-year-olds, we'll see acting out, aggressiveness, lack of compliance, withdrawing, guilt, decreased inhibition to unusual situations. So again, there's so many issues around emotional regulation, difficulty developing secure social relationships and friendships and adult supports. So much of what we thought in adult mental health really can be traced back to early childhood. Now, I know many of you have heard about the stress response. And so when we're stressed, there's 3 levels of stress. There's that stress that's the normal stress that we have in a new situation, like learning how to drive the car. You all remember how challenging that was. And you need a little bit of stress as you learn. It kind of heightens your system, but that's temporary and situational. Then there's tolerable stress. So something bad happens, it happens for a little bit, but there's someone there that helps you and regulates you. That's important. And then there's toxic stress or stress that doesn't stop, and there's no one there to help you. So that's the stress that we have. So many of you have heard about fight or flight, right? We all heard that, you know, when we're threatened, we either want to fight or we want to run, right? That's in the middle. The other thing that we see is people freeze. They just get overwhelmed and they freeze. And that's on, when you look at the slides, that's on the side that says freeze. Now, if you go to the other side of the slide and you see this hormone called oxytocin that gets kicked in, that's when there's someone there to comfort us. When there's someone there to comfort us, we affiliate or we connect. And that's why the ability for a parent and child to connect and soothe is so important. We actually get stronger with that. And that's how that resiliency builds. So when we send you the follow-up, I'm going to ask that Dana and Jess remind me. I want to send you something on a temperament checklist. So temperament is the biologic way that we respond to our environment. And it really has to do with these 9 characteristic areas. It's activity level, your initial reaction, your sensitivity, your persistence, your adaptability, your regularity, your distractibility, your mood intensity, your threshold. So I'll send you something that allows you to look at you and your baby and you and your toddler. And this is just a great resource for parents. The reason I share this is in our work, we have found that when we can have parents understand this idea that babies are born with a particular temperament, that changes a little bit, can change a little bit, but you know, it's somewhat our innate personality. It's really interesting because it kind of becomes an aha moment. And it's interesting because sometimes sometimes it works better if the parents are matched, and sometimes that match your child's style, and sometimes it's better if you don't match. So if you have like families that are very intense and the kid's really intense and the parents really intense, everybody gets intense. So again, sometimes the match is not always good. It's nice to have a kid who's a little bit more reactive and a parent who's a little more calm. So this checklist that I'll share with you all as a follow-up is just a great tool that gives parents these aha moments of going, oh, that's why my child is that way. What's always really insightful is doing that with your life partner, because you'll go, oh, wow, we really react differently to the same situation. One of the things that I've been talking a lot about is attachment. And attachment is this amazing thing. There was a psychologist, Bowlby, who looked at parents and how the child attaches to the parent. And he has an interesting life experience in that he was separated from his family during World War II. And so he was raised by others. So it was really interesting. He took his early experiences and studied how it looks in other kids. Attachment happens when the caregiver, often the mother, is how they respond to the child. If the mom is responding in a consistent and appropriate way, the child develops what's known as a secure attachment. And the secure attachment allows kids to explore trust. They're playful, they're social, they're less inhibited, they're more confident. But if the mother is not consistent in her response, you'll see 2 different types. Well, actually, there's 3 different types of attachment styles. Ambivalent, which means they'll cry when they're separated and they'll resist when they're reunited. So they're kind of like, I don't know if I can trust you. And then the avoidant appears indifferent, like they don't want to be around. So you can think about this as how do kids respond when the caregiver is not consistent. So these attachment styles become really important. One of the things that's really interesting is I've had a number of folks that have read attachment style books as it relates to their adult relationships. And when they see how their needs were met or not met as kids, it really is very helpful. So you'll see in this next slide, it's a busy slide, about how this, the attachment style of the secure, where the parent is quickly and responsive. The child, when the parent leaves, is distressed. They're happy when they return. They seek comfort. In the insecure avoidant, the caregiver's response is unresponsive and uncaring and a little bit dismissive. And so there's no distress when the caregiver lives. They don't or leaves. I'm sorry, and they don't acknowledge when the person returns. And so in the next one, the parent responds inconsistently to the child. The child is distressed. And so this one also has that fourth one, which is the insecure and disorganized. And that's where the parent is actually a little bit frightening in their response. And this is very rare, 1 to 2%. But when it happens, you really notice the child really being disassociated and dysregulated. And so you need to really work intensively with these kinds of families. But these are the attachment styles and a little bit more information. But kids learn through exploring. And so when you think about it, a strong attachment gives you what's known as a secure base, which means I need you. And you'll see on that top piece, like the kid will go or they'll explore. And when they get far enough away, they look back to the secure base, the parent, and they check in. So think about those of you who have kids, like you'll see your child, they'll kind of go off and they'll look back to you and they'll keep exploring. They're just checking in. So you're their secure base. The other part is the safe haven. It's when I'm scared or something goes on, I reach for you and you're there for me. So that secure base and safe haven, we notice that pattern repeats all through life. So again, if you did not get that early in life, there's ways to repair that later on. Often we see this with parents who didn't have that, but they're able to give it to their kids through their own growth. What you give, you get. So you'll see parents who didn't have that, give that to their kids, and it actually increases it within themselves. And if we look at the secure base, these repeated positive experiences create this whole piece of family membership, a sense of belonging, sensitivity, availability, acceptance, cooperation. So again, it's so critical. And we can look at social milestones. When it's under 6 months, we're looking for that social smile, distinguishing the mom from others, smiles, coos, or pats their own image in the mirror, as you see this little one doing. 6 months to a year, reach for familiar people. They play games like peekaboo, patty cake. They push away unwanted things. They drop requested things from their hand to the asker's hand. From 1 year to 6 months, they'll give hugs and kisses. They'll hug a dollar, a stuffed animal. They greet with hi. They come to the parent for help. They get your attention by pulling on your hands or your clothes. And at 18 months, we see, says no when they're interfered with, usually responds to corrections, shows sympathy for other kids. They rock, dress, or feed their dolls and stuffed animals, and they're building that sense of self. And you see this little cute one feeding her dolly. At 2, they play with other kids. They help with simple tasks. They play roles in pretend games, mom, teacher, firefighter, superhero, and they easily become frustrated. Again, they're just learning so much. One of the things that we're looking for and what you hear a lot about is autism, and you'll hear a lot of concerns from parents. And it really is, the numbers vary, but it's about 1 in 150 kids. It's a spectrum. Early intervention is critical because if we can identify early and if we can really make a difference. As we talked about the social emotional developmental screening and the autism specific or the MCHAT is really important. So with autism, what you're hearing is concerns in language. There's delayed language, there's loss of language after 1 year, no eye contact when making requests, kind of a sing-songy robotic voice, repetition without understanding, and doesn't start and sustain conversation. We also see concerns with social skills, doesn't respond to their name, poor eye contact, appears not to hear, resists cuddling and holding, appears unaware of others' feelings, and prefers to play alone. Also, there's repetitive, like stimulating movements, routines and rituals, upset with change and routine, fascination with moving parts, unusual sensitivity to light, touch, and sound. Some of these things happen in all kids, but with kids with autism, it's really different. And so, again, we want to identify early. So in the last part of what we're going to talk about today, I'm just going to talk about self-regulation. But the reason I talk about it is because there's this term, and it's a funny term. I think sometimes in our developmental world, we use terms that really are a little bit off-putting, like executive function. So this idea of executive function is really talking about the front part of our brain. Our frontal lobes is really important to learning how to control our behavior, paying attention, and developing thinking skills like attention, memory, attaining goals, monitoring flow of information, and problem solving. It is complex. People use the metaphor of an air traffic controller, of all this information that has to be put together. Now, one of the funny things I mentioned, the frontal lobes, I'm going to tap my head because that's where you find that part of the brain. But as we've come to understand, the frontal lobes don't fully develop until 26. So development is a constant process. And I would even argue that it's a lifelong process. So again, we really want to help kids with what's known as self-regulation. And so self-regulation is taking information from our environment and sorting out what's useful and tuning out what's not useful. It depends on our own level of stress and our level of arousal. It's critical to self-control and our ability to form relationships with others. And if you look at the arousal continuum, going back to flight or fight, right? So you can, when you're aroused, you can be flooded and hyper alert. So you're ready to fight. You're kind of tuned up. You're looking for threats. Or your system can overwhelm and you can become less alert, drowsy, and maybe even fall asleep. And that's really the flight freeze part about things. Or actually, sorry, that's actually more the freeze part of things. And again, we all learn best when we're calm, alert, and present, which I hope you are still at this point. We're more than an hour in, so I hope you're all doing well. So self-regulation skills allow kids, and I like to say adults, manage their emotions, behavior, and body movements when they're faced with a situation that's tough to handle. It allows them to do things while staying focused and pay attention. And I like the metaphor of a car, right? So we have our friend here, Lightning McQueen, and you think about it, how the parts work together. You need the engine, the accelerator, the brake, the gas tank, the speedometer, the gauges, and the tire. And you also need to consider the road, the weather, and the traffic. And so again, it's a fascinating thing that we can teach kids as young as 3 of like, how is your engine running? Are you running fast? Are you running slow? Are you running okay? And if we teach kids these things early, they learn it. I mean, it's amazing. They start getting a better sense of attunement to their own bodies. But why is this so important? Well, babies actually need external regulation. They cannot self-regulate. The massive brain growth in the early part of life is critical. And so parents and primary caregivers are really the external brain that both regulate and stimulate a baby. Sometimes a baby needs to be stimulated so they'll eat. Sometimes they just need to be calmed, right? But by being regulated, the baby starts building that ability to self-regulate. So just a picture of that is the parent with a baby and needing to co-regulate, and children learn to self-regulate with a parent. And so that becomes really important and very, very critical as it relates to what's going on for kids. And again, this whole skill of regulating is really important. I know we're talking about young kids, but I want to talk about teenagers as well. Teenagers go through this period of incredible growth in their brains. And we talk about their rebellion, we talk about other things, but really what they need at that time too is co-regulation. They need somebody who can be there with them, that can help them to regulate themselves, connect, and then reason. So we often teach people the idea of help kids regulate, connect with them, and then help them understand. Because again, when you're in that phase of arousal, you just aren't really able to hear things. And so again, that's another really important piece in parenting, is helping parents understand their kid's state. So again, when they're little, they need this co-regulation. When they're teenagers, they need this co-regulation. And I would argue that we as adults need it. Those of you who work with kids and families, if things can be difficult, it's great to reach out to somebody who's a colleague or a peer and to get that co-regulation from them as well. And it's great for us to help one another. We're living in a time now where there's just, everybody seems to be upset. And if we could just help everybody just stay a little bit calmer, everything could be better. So finally, I just want to talk about one area with parents. And there's so many areas that we could talk about with parents. And gosh, I could spend hours talking about how to support parents. We're going to talk about postpartum depression. And, again, screening is important. There's a tool called the Edinburgh. There's something called the PH2 and the PH9, which is a longer version. Brooke Shields was one of those folks that actually used her celebrity in a really nice way of talking about her own postpartum depression. And when we screen for it, the important part is the treatment, because postpartum depression can affect the attachment relationship, the infant mental health. We see developmental delays. We see increased health, illness and injury in kids, and later mental health and drug abuse issues when mothers are depressed and not available. Treatment's highly effective, and it reverses those developmental delays. I'm just going to stop and talk a little bit more about the parent mental health component, because we now talk about this not just as postpartum depression, but we talk about depression all through childhood. Anytime in childhood, a parent can be depressed. So there are some specifics about postpartum that are very critical. There's a really, really small group of mothers that get what's known as postpartum psychosis, and that's an emergency. We also see suicidal ideation, which is also an emergency. So again, it's so critical to have supports in place for parents. But we're also seeing that there are other mood disorders such as anxiety that affect moms and dads. And that's the other part, is we need to screen fathers as well. There's actually about a 25% of fathers that are depressed when the mother is depressed. So it becomes very interesting to look at that. And that is actually true in same-sex partners who have kids. That postpartum depression can show up in both caregivers, and it becomes so important to help them. The other part, as I mentioned, anxiety also gives you that same piece of concern. And I've said through this time period that we've all gone through this incredibly challenging time period with COVID, with race relationships, with different issues that have emerged that need to be addressed. Our level of anxiety is incredibly high as a society. And so we just really need to support parents. And we often say you don't need to be a therapist to be therapeutic in your relationship. So checking in with yourself, your own level of being calm, your own level of self-regulation is really helpful. And it's really helpful to then regulate others. Now, I can't believe this, but we are at our second to last slide. I can't believe I covered all of that material in that time period, but it'll give us time for questions, which I hope there are plenty of. But I do want to leave you with: a child is born with the capacity to learn. The quality of the child's relationship with the caretaker nurtures that ability. And with secure attachment, quality emotional regulation, and supportive environments, each generation can surpass the previous one in development and learning. I hope today that you really get the fact that we call this parent nurturing as well, because we need to nurture our parents so they can nurture their kids. And as I mentioned before, all families experience stress and all families deserve support. And what we really do in our work is we focus on parents' strengths and we help them build skills. And it just is really an incredible place to be able to support families. I've given you a lot of tools that you can dive in deeper, kind of gave you like a sampling of things. As I mentioned, I could talk about any one of these areas for 90 minutes by itself. There's just such great detail and depth. And I hope that this talk really inspires you to learn more and to figure out how you can use this stuff, as well as diving into those resources and sharing them with parents in a way that they could use. Again, I hope at some point we talk about trauma and how trauma affects families. Just a really brief story before we take questions. In our work with Healthy Development Services, we started serving families, and we do everything from parent education to evidence-based therapies, mental health therapies. I knew the mental health therapists would be experiencing what's known as secondary trauma, but our parent educators were experiencing trauma. And so that made me look at this more carefully. And we see so many families experience this, and that trauma affects their ability to move forward. So again, our sensitivity of being safe and comforting the families and supporting them can really help families that have been traumatized to use our systems. And that's really what we found. So the work that you all do with families, keeping in mind that it's not what happened, it's not what's wrong with somebody, it's what happened to them early in their development that affects them today. And I'm going to actually, again, ask Jess and Dana to remind me. A book that I would highly recommend on trauma is one for the general audience. It's called What Happened to You. It's by a person who's been one of my teachers, Dr. Bruce Perry, who's amazing. And he's working with somebody that you might have heard of. Her name is Oprah. She's so famous, you can just give one name. And I would highly recommend the Audible because it is Bruce, who I consider a friend, and Oprah, who I don't consider a friend, but she's just so well known, I can call her by her first name. But Bruce and Oprah are having a conversation and talking about families and situations in a way that really helps you understand it's never what's wrong with the person. It's what happened to them early in their development that's still affecting them today. And so I'll open up for questions. I can't believe we actually did that.
I'm so impressed. Actually, it was a lot of content. We have a couple of questions to start us off. The first is from Pat, and taking us back to the section on attachment.
Yes.
Pat asks if the attachment styles presented are true for fathers also.
Yes. So, okay. So this is, I love this topic. So one of the things that's interesting, yes, it's true for fathers. It's a little less studied. It's a little less, it's really about the primary caregiver. It's whoever's giving the most care. Now, it's true for fathers, but my mother always challenges me with, well, you were born in India. You had all these people taking care of you. What's the attachment relationship? So what we distinguish is the primary attachment relationship and other attachment relationships. And so there are attachment relationships with everybody who's a caregiver. So just a funny little story is I was 18 months old when my parents moved from India. So my grandmother and my grandfather were my primary caregivers, and there they have nannies. And so I had someone who was a caretaker. So I lost 3 of my 5 attachment figures, and 2 of my attachment figures, my mom and my dad, came with me, but I lost 3 of my attachment figures. So my mom, who experiences guilt like every parent does, and I always reassure her, no, Mom, look at this. This is amazing. I lost those attachment figures, and now I teach about attachment so other kids and others can have repair to their attachment relationships. And I said, plus, I never got rid of you and Dad. I mean, you guys are around. My dad was such an active dad that we used to joke, you need a hobby besides us. So I'm, I actually see that as a benefit. But yes, parents, and as I would mention, when my father was alive, I was very attached to him. He took care of me quite a bit when we came to this country. So yes, fathers can have that, but also other caregivers, whoever's involved with taking care of the child has attachment relationships. And we often talk about the primary attachment relationship, but it really is important to look at all of the attachment relationships, and the more attachment, the better.
Super interesting. Heather asks, this is a little bit longer question. Heather asks, occasionally I see a child who is stimming in infancy, such as when eating in a high chair. They'll hold out their arms and wiggle their wrists in a specific way, repeatedly. The child is able to eat and distract from this behavior. Do you see this type of behavior sometimes in young children? My understanding is that stimming is not specific to autism,
Yes,
but could be if there are other behaviors for autism. Is there any other guidance that I should give the parents if they continue to be concerned about the stimming?
absolutely. I think the important part is to say that there's a wide range of behaviors that show up and disappear in childhood. And again, it's the journey of development that's so important. What's important there is how is the child in terms of their interaction, right? It's really important if a child is connecting to you and following you, that's great. So again, I'll use my niece as an example. My niece was really funny. She did not play with or like other kids, but she loved adults. And so my mom asked me, she goes, do you think she's autistic? I'm like, Mom, she's so connected to all of us. So there was that interaction between adult and child. But for whatever reason, she just wasn't comfortable with other little kids. And, today she's perfectly normal. She's got lots of friends and is, not shy at all. And my brother said, hey, worst case is she's a little shy as an adult. Well, she's not even shy as an adult. So it's important. That's the piece of the predictability and watching and looking at things not in isolation. So the stimming is important to see, but kids will do repetitive pieces because they're learning, right? They'll do like these little things. But again, how is that interaction with the parent and the child? So once you see a child who's really connected to the parent and responding, I worry a lot less.
Shindana has 2 questions for you. She asks, when you put together this presentation, what was the one thing that you hoped that we would walk away with? And she would like to know what motivated you to do this work and continues to motivate you to do this work.
Well, a couple of things. So first, let's start out with what I hope you take away. I hope you take away that in med school, you run across colleagues that say, oh, I love kids, but I don't like parents. And I'm like, well, then you're missing out, because parents are pretty amazing and they're trying to do amazing things for their kids. So what motivates me the most, and what I hope you take away from this, is how important the parent-child interaction is and how important supporting parents is. Helping them get that information is so critical. And I'm so excited that you'll be having an opportunity to look at the strengthening families, protective factors piece later. Again, November 30th, brought to you by Caltrin. It's super important to understand how this is. And a couple of things. I'm a full and firm believer in human potential. I'm probably somewhere in humanistic psychology of believing that the capacity and the good of human beings is just amazing. And the place where I think we can have the biggest impact is early in life, and supporting parents and supporting kids is what motivates me. I think development is endlessly fascinating. I mean, there are people right now programming robots, and they're so far behind Mother Nature, because to watch a child learn to walk, to watch a child learn how to talk, it's remarkable. I mean, I'm like, there's a sense of awe and wonder that I have. There's a level of what I can explain and what I can't explain. I think child development, I always joke, is the third most amazing thing in my experience. The first is that a woman can become pregnant and support a baby that only has half of her DNA. So the pregnancy is remarkable in and of itself. And then the other thing that's remarkable is the baby's first breath. They go from being a waterborne creature in the mom's womb to being an airborne creature. So those two things are the things that awe me even more than child development, because child development couldn't happen without them. So there's a continuum, but I am in just awe of what I am learning all the time about kids and babies and parents and the interaction. And, my joke is, it's just through the whole life course. If I could, I would do stuff through the whole life course, but you have to kind of focus on an area to have an impact. And I can't tell you how much I love. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious when you hear me talk how much I love this topic. And it's because I just love people.
We love that we have you with us. We have another question from Bobby McCann, who asks, with children in our foster care with little or no familial support, how can we best help them co-regulate and support their attachment to support. I'm going to try that again, Bobby. With our children in foster care with little or no familiar support, how can we best help them co-regulate and support their attachment to safe adults, specifically with preteens and without burning out professionals on the team?
Yeah. So let me unpack that question in a way. So if we're going to focus on preteens who haven't had those strong attachment relationships, you can build those attachment relationships any time in life. It just is a little bit harder. I think what we understand now is how do you restore that reparative relationship? Okay. So again, I mentioned child-parent psychotherapy. There's another attachment-based, but also trauma-based, because again, attachment disruption is a trauma, called ARC by Bessel van der Kolk. So we'll put that we'll put his website in. His name is Bassel, next word, Van, V-A-N, third part of his name, Der, D-E-R, Kolk, K-O-K, K-O-L-K. Bessel van der Kolk is the psychiatrist who got PTSD in the diagnostic criteria, and he's pretty amazing in his work as well. And he has something called ARC, and that's a attachment-based regulation therapy. But we need to work on an attachment-based relationship with a consistent adult who's committed to the child. And over time, that can repair. And it is astounding what happens when you have an attachment relationship where the person is attuned to you and is helping you meet your needs, even later in life. Again, great repair can happen. What you're asking about and what is needed is a much larger financial commitment to healing. And, you know, it's important. I just recently gave a talk where the theme was feel, heal, and grow, right? So trauma is not a life sentence. If we can work with our traumas, it promotes growth. And there's something known as post-traumatic growth. And in these kids, what we really need to do is wrap around them with a supportive environment. And I'm sorry, I just don't know how we can't do this as a society. If we pay so much money and Facebook is making so much money, why don't we just tax Mark Zuckerberg to get all of that money to work on mental health? He's certainly destroying enough mental health. Sorry, that was an editorial. But the key piece here is, why can't we as the richest nation ever support people? They did nothing wrong. There is no judgment on that. What is needed is to wrap around and create environments where they can feel safe, where they can feel that trust and can grow. And I really believe in the infinite possibilities of healing. So again, I just think that's a lack of us as a society doing that. But you're right. How do you not burn out staff? I think it becomes important to set clear boundaries. I think it's important to set realistic expectations. I think it's also accepting the context of where we are as a society in terms of not putting the money in there. But I think we need to advocate for these things. I think we need to advocate for the most vulnerable individuals in our society. And those folks that had those disruptions early on, again, if you look at their parents didn't get the support that they needed when they were younger. So we see these intergenerational traumas. Drug addiction is not about the addiction. It's about what is the pain underneath that caused the addiction. And so again, you'll always see trauma underneath all this stuff. So again, it's that piece of how do we heal trauma? And when we heal trauma, what we see is things like art that's created. We see ways of people processing. So we just have to really broaden our lens on how do we support people who've been traumatized.
Dr. Pradeep, we're going to take one more question. It's actually related to trauma.
Yeah.
The question is, do you use the ACEs screening tool, and do you feel it is a necessary intervention in the conversation about trauma-informed care?
Okay, sorry, big sigh. This is part of my work. I think the ACEs screening is a helpful piece of getting people to understand how impactful trauma is. I think what's more important is asking people what was difficult early in their life. You don't ask what's your trauma, you ask what was difficult early in your life. And do you think it's affecting you today? And what can we do to help you today? So again, just like that preteen who didn't get what they needed, trauma in and of itself is impactful, but it's who is there with you to help you with that trauma, who was there to support you at that time. And if the support wasn't there, then you have this unprocessed experience, an overwhelm of your system. And so we can be here today to help you now. And so I have positives about ACEs. I don't like the idea of just asking the questions. I think it's really finding that supportive environment. Also, the original ACEs, I've actually had the pleasure of talking with Dr. Felitti, who was the lead of the original study. And he acknowledges historical trauma was not accounted for. There's so many things that aren't accounted for. What do you do with immigrant refugees who experience stress that's just tremendous? So I think it's helpful in helping people understand that our physical and mental health are interconnected. But I worry a little bit about a questionnaire, and I worry about what's the follow-up. So we're working on that with our pediatricians who are doing the screening, but we are working on what do we do with that now. In addition to the ACEs, so adverse childhood experiences, for those of you who haven't heard, adverse childhood experiences, there's a woman named Wendy Ellis who coined the term the pair of ACEs. And she said where communities have high levels of adverse childhood experiences, we have adverse community environments. And so again, the social determinants of health also impact. So I think we need to have a comprehensive look at how do you work with the social determinants of health? How do we work with ACEs? But more broadly than ACEs is trauma. And again, relationships are always the key in terms of healing and repairing. Wow, I could do these questions all day long. These are very good questions. I know we're running out of time, Jess.
That is okay. We're just so grateful for your time and so grateful for these questions. So thank you to the participants that entered their questions. They're all awesome.